The morning sun cast long shadows across the shooting range at Naval Base Coronado. The distinctive crack of high-caliber rifles echoed through the salt-tinged air as SEAL Team 8 ran through their qualification drills. Commander Max Steele watched his men with a critical eye, noting every minor deviation in their form and execution. "Fisher, adjust your breathing pattern. You're jerking the trigger between exhales." Steele called out, his weathered face showing little emotion beneath his salt and pepper beard. At 42, Steele was considered one of the most experienced ION SEAL team leaders still in active field service. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, and countless classified operations had earned him a reputation as a no-nonsense commander who demanded perfection. "Yes, sir," David Doc Fisher replied, readjusting his position behind the M110 semi-automatic sniper rifle. At 34, Fisher was the team's primary marksman with an impressive service record of his own. Still, even he knew better than to question Steele's observations. Meanwhile, at the far end of the range, a slender figure moved quietly among the equipment sheds. Lucy Graham, 26, had been the range maintenance specialist at Coronado for just over 2 years. Her duties were straightforward: clean the shooting stations, replace targets, collect spent brass casings, and ensure all equipment was properly maintained for the elite warriors who trained there daily. To the men of SEAL Team 8, Lucy was practically invisible. Just another civilian contractor who kept the machinery of the naval base running smoothly. Few of them had ever spoken more than a few words to her beyond basic courtesies, and fewer still knew anything about her background or qualifications. Lucy preferred it that way. As she methodically collected brass casings from an adjacent lane, she glanced briefly at Fisher's shooting form. Her trained eye noticed immediately what Steele had pointed out: the subtle inconsistency in Fisher's breathing pattern that was affecting his accuracy at long range. But she also caught something Steele hadn't mentioned. Fisher's left elbow was positioned at an angle that created unnecessary tension in his shoulder. "That's going to cause drift after his 4th or 5th shot in rapid sequence," she thought to herself, but kept her expression neutral as she continued her work. Lucy had learned long ago that offering unsolicited advice to men like these was rarely welcomed, especially if from someone they viewed as merely the cleaning girl. So she moved silently through her morning routine while absorbing every detail of the SEAL team's training exercises like a sponge. "Graham," a voice called out, breaking her concentration. Lucy looked up to see Chief Petty Officer Mike Harris, the team's communications specialist, gesturing toward a cluster of targets at the 300-meter mark. "We need those targets replaced before we move to the next drill." "Right away, sir," she replied, her voice quiet but clear. Harris barely acknowledged her response before turning back to his team. That was typical of the interactions Lucy had with the operators: brief, professional, and utterly forgettable from their perspective. As she loaded fresh targets onto her maintenance cart, Lucy's mind drifted back to her childhood in Montana, to the sprawling ranch where she had spent every weekend of her youth learning skills that the men on this range would never suspect she possessed. "Breathe, little ghost. Breathe and be still." 11-year-old Lucy Graham lay prone on the frost-covered grass of her grandfather's ranch, a modified Remington 700 bolt-action rifle customized with a shorter stock to fit her small frame pressed against her shoulder. The crisp Montana morning air filled her lungs as she followed the familiar rhythm her grandfather had taught her. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 2, exhale for 4, hold for 2. Beside her, Warren Ghost Eye Graham watched through a spotting scope, his weathered hands steady despite the early morning chill. At 67, the former Army Ranger still carried himself with the quiet dignity and precision that had made him a legend among a very select group of military operators decades earlier. "What's the distance to target?" he asked, his voice calm and measured. Lucy squinted slightly through the scope. 425 yards to the center of the steel plate. A wind, she licked her finger and held it up briefly before returning to her shooting position. Approximately 6 miles per hour left to right. Temperature effect: cold morning, approximately 42 degrees. Density altitude is higher than standard. Bullet will impact slightly higher than at standard conditions. Warren nodded approvingly. "And what does that tell you about your adjustment?" Lucy's small fingers made minute adjustments to her scope. "I need to compensate 1.5 minutes right for wind drift and adjust down a quarter minute for density altitude." "Good," Warren smiled, the creases around his eyes deepening. "Now remember what I always tell you. The rifle is just a tool," Lucy recited, her eyes never leaving the scope. My mind is the real weapon. That's my girl. When you're ready, take your shot. Lucy cycled through her breathing pattern once more, feeling her heartbeat slow as she entered the state of calm focus her grandfather had spent years helping her develop. The world narrowed to just her, the rifle, and the distant steel plate. On her final exhale, she squeezed the trigger with deliberate pressure. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, the report echoing across the open Montana landscape. A moment later, the clear ring of a bullet striking steel reached their ears. "Center hit," Warren announced proudly. "Excellent shot, little ghost." Lucy allowed herself a small smile as she worked the bolt, ejecting the spent casing. "Again?" she said eagerly. Warren chuckled. "You never get tired of this, do you?" "Never," she replied earnestly. "I want to be as good as you were, Grandpa." A shadow crossed the old man's face, but it passed quickly. "You'll be better, Lucy. Much better. The world just isn't ready for what women like you can do." As they continued their practice, Warren shared stories of his time in service, carefully edited versions of classified operations that had taken him from the jungles of Southeast Asia to the mountains of Afghanistan and the deserts of the Middle East. What he never told her directly, but what Lucy had pieced together from overheard conversations and old photographs hidden in his study, was that her grandfather had once been among the most lethal precision marksmen in U.S. military history. Master Sergeant Warren Ghost Eye Graham had served with the 75th Ranger Regiment during some of the most sensitive operations of the Cold War and beyond. His confirmed kills during official operations exceeded 100, though the actual number was likely much higher. More importantly, he had pioneered shooting techniques and fieldcraft methods that were still being taught in modified form to special operations snipers today. "Grandpa," Lucy asked as they packed up their gear later that morning, "why did you leave the Army? Mom says you could have been a general if you'd stayed in." Warren secured the rifle case before answering. "Your mother exaggerates. Rangers don't typically become generals." He paused, considering how much to share with his precocious granddaughter. "I was injured during an operation in Lebanon in '83. Rocket attack shrapnel in my right arm and shoulder." He flexed his right hand unconsciously, the old scars barely visible now. The damage wasn't career-ending physically, but the mission itself. There were complications, political considerations. His voice hardened. The operation was disavowed. "What does disavowed mean?" Lucy asked, struggling with the unfamiliar word. "It means the government decided officially that we were never there, that what we did, what we sacrificed, never happened." The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable, even to a child. "I couldn't serve under those conditions anymore. Not when good men died for nothing." Lucy nodded solemnly, sensing the weight of her grandfather's words, even if she couldn't fully comprehend them yet. "Is that why you started teaching me? Because no one remembered what you did?" Warren smiled, then a genuine smile that softened his normally stern features. "No, little ghost. I teach you because you have a gift, a natural talent that shouldn't be wasted just because you were born a girl in a world that doesn't yet understand what women are capable of." He knelt down to her level, his hands on her shoulders. "I teach you because someday the skills I'm giving you might make all the difference, not just for you, but for others who might need you." It was a prophecy that would prove more accurate than either of them could have imagined. Lucy's small apartment in the suburbs of San Diego was sparse but meticulously organized. The living room contained a comfortable but unremarkable sofa, a coffee table stacked with ballistics journals and engineering magazines, and a television that rarely saw use. The kitchen was equally utilitarian, with a single place setting that spoke to her solitary lifestyle. The bedroom, however, told a different story. After securing her apartment door behind her, Lucy moved to the bedroom closet and knelt on the hardwood floor. She slid aside a section of baseboard to reveal a small, hidden compartment containing a combination safe. After entering the code, her grandfather's date of birth, she removed a weathered wooden box with "Rangers Lead the Way" carved into the lid. Inside the box lay the tangible remnants of Warren Graham's military legacy, his Silver Star Medal awarded for valor during a classified operation, his Master Sergeant insignia, a faded photograph of a young Warren standing with his Ranger team in the early 1970s, and a small leather-bound journal filled with handwritten notes on advanced shooting techniques, environmental calculations, and observations from decades of precision marksmanship. Lucy ran her fingers lightly over the silver star. Her grandfather had rarely spoken about how he earned it, saying only that it came at too high a price. After his death 5 years earlier, she had found documents in his personal effects suggesting the medal was connected to a covert operation codenamed Eagle Falls, an apparent offshoot of the infamous Operation Eagle Claw, the failed 1980 attempt to rescue American hostages in Iran. According to the fragmentary information Lucy had pieced together, her grandfather had been part of a secondary team assigned to eliminate security threats around the primary extraction zone. When the main operation was aborted after helicopter failures, Warren's team was allegedly left in position for an additional 36 hours, continuing their mission without support or acknowledgement. What happened during those 36 hours remained a mystery even to Lucy. Her grandfather had taken those secrets to his grave, leaving behind only cryptic journal entries and redacted documents that raised more questions than they answered. Lucy replaced the journal in the box, her mind turning to the day's events at the shooting range. Watching SEAL Team 8 train, observing their techniques and procedures always brought a mix of emotions. Professional interest certainly, but also a deep-seated frustration that her own skills remained unrecognized and unutilized. After her grandfather's death, Lucy had attempted to enlist in the military with hopes of eventually qualifying for sniper training. Her test scores had been exemplary perfect marks on the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude, Battery Outstanding Physical Fitness Assessments, and preliminary marksmanship evaluations that had raised eyebrows among the recruiting officers. But bureaucratic obstacles and institutional bias had proven insurmountable. Despite her qualifications, she had been steered towards support roles rather than combat specialties. The message, though never stated explicitly, had been clear. Women, regardless of their abilities, were not welcome in the rarefied world of special operations and precision marksmanship. Rather than accept a role that would waste her unique training, Lucy had instead pursued a degree in mechanical engineering with a focus on ballistics, hoping that academic credentials might open doors that her gender had closed. Upon graduation, she had taken the maintenance position at Coronado, reasoning that proximity to the training environment of elite operators would provide opportunities that might not otherwise be available. For 2 years, she had watched and waited, absorbing everything she could about current tactics, techniques, and procedures, while remaining essentially invisible to the men who employed them. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her grandfather had been nicknamed Ghost Eye for his ability to observe targets undetected for days at a time. And now she had become a different kind of ghost, hidden in plain sight among the very warriors who might have benefited from her skills. Her phone buzzed with a text message alert. It was from her supervisor at the base. "Need you in early tomorrow, 0500. SEAL Team 8 scheduled for pre-deployment qualification shoot. Full range setup required." Lucy texted back a simple acknowledgement. Pre-deployment qualification meant that Steele's team was preparing for an imminent mission, likely somewhere in the Middle East, given the current geopolitical situation. It also meant they would be utilizing the full-range complex, including the advanced 1,000-yard range, reserved for final validation of mission-ready teams. She would need to be at her best tomorrow, ensuring that every aspect of the range was perfectly prepared for what might be the team's final training evolution before deploying into harm's way. As she prepared for bed, Lucy paused at her nightstand, drawn to her grandfather's journal once more. Something about today's training session had triggered a memory, a connection she couldn't quite place. She flipped through the worn pages, scanning entries dating back decades. As she turned to close the journal, a small photograph slipped from between the pages and fell to the floor. Lucy picked it up, examining it under the soft lamplight. It showed her grandfather, much younger, standing next to another soldier. Both men wore non-standard gear, typical of special operations in the early 1980s. They were smiling arms around each other's shoulders in a rare moment of battlefield camaraderie. Lucy turned the photo over. Written in her grandfather's precise handwriting were the words, "Eagle Falls, 1980, Me Wilson and Secrets That Should Never Stay Buried." Lucy studied the other man's face more carefully. There was something vaguely familiar about him, though she was certain she had never met him. She returned the photograph to the journal, making a mental note to examine it more closely later. As she drifted off to sleep, her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. "Someday the skills I'm giving you might make all the difference." The naval base was eerily quiet as Lucy's ID badge granted her access through the security checkpoint. The sky was still dark, with only the faintest hint of approaching dawn on the eastern horizon. She drove her maintenance truck to the range complex, the familiar routine requiring little conscious thought. As she began setting up the range, placing target arrays at various distances, and ensuring the electronic scoring systems were properly calibrated, Lucy's mind wandered to the dream that had disturbed her sleep the previous night. A vivid reimagining of one of her grandfather's rare stories about his time in Lebanon. In the dream, as in her grandfather's retelling, Warren Graham had been positioned on a rooftop overlooking a market square, tasked with eliminating a high-value target associated with the terrorist bombing of the U.S. Marine barracks. But in Lucy's dream, as the moment of the shot approached, she had found herself behind the rifle instead of her grandfather, the crosshairs centered on a figure whose face remained obscured. She had awakened just as her dream self squeezed the trigger, the phantom recoil of the rifle still reverberating through her body as consciousness returned. Unusual to see someone who enjoys 0500 range setup, a voice commented, pulling Lucy from her thoughts. She turned to find Commander Steele standing nearby, his arms crossed as he surveyed the work she had already completed. Despite the early hour, he was fully outfitted in his combat uniform, his bearing as precise as if he were about to address a formation. "Good morning, Commander," Lucy replied professionally. "Just getting everything ready for your team's qualification." Steele nodded, his expression unreadable. "You've been maintaining our ranges for what, 2 years now?" "Yes, sir, 2 years and 3 months." "You do good work, Graham. Ranges are always in perfect condition when my team arrives." It was the closest thing to a compliment Lucy had ever received from the SEAL commander. "Thank you, sir. I try to ensure everything is operational and accurate." Steele seemed about to say something else when his radio crackled to life. "Commander Fisher and Harris have arrived with the equipment truck. Ready to begin setup whenever you are." "Copy that. On my way." Steele gave Lucy a final nod before striding toward the main range building. The brief interaction left Lucy with an odd feeling. In 2 years, Steele had hardly acknowledged her existence beyond basic professional courtesy, and now he had sought her out specifically to comment on her work. It was unusual, but she had little time to dwell on it as the rest of SEAL Team 8 began arriving for their qualification shoot. As the morning progressed, Lucy remained in the background, making adjustments to targets when requested and ensuring the range equipment functioned flawlessly. She watched as the team cycled through various weapon systems and distances, noting the subtle differences in each operator's technique and effectiveness. Fisher, the team's primary marksman, was performing well at ranges up to 800 yards, but Lucy could see that he was struggling with the extreme long-distance shot at the 1,000-yard line. His fundamentals were solid, but something in his application was inconsistent at the outer limits of conventional marksmanship. "Fisher, you're dropping your shots at the 7 o'clock position consistently," Steele observed after reviewing the target camera feed. "Adjust your windage and try again." Lucy, who had been collecting spent casings nearby, could see that Steele's diagnosis was incorrect. The pattern of Fisher's shots suggested not a windage issue, but a subtle flaw in his shooting position, one that her grandfather had specifically trained her to recognize and correct. For a moment, she considered saying nothing. It wasn't her place to contradict a SEAL commander or offer advice to his team, but as Fisher prepared to fire another sequence, frustration evident in his body language, Lucy made a decision that would alter the course of her life. "Excuse me, sir," she said quietly, approaching Steele with appropriate deference. "I don't mean to intrude, but I noticed something that might help." Steele turned, surprise evident on his face. "What's that, Graham?" "It's not a windage issue, sir. Petty Officer Fisher's left elbow is positioned too far under the rifle, creating torque in his shoulder. That's why the shots are grouping at 7 o'clock at extended ranges. The muscular tension increases as he fatigues through each string of fire." The range fell silent. Fisher had paused in his preparation, looking over his shoulder at the civilian maintenance specialist who had just delivered a technical assessment of his shooting form. Steele's expression darkened. "And you know this? How exactly?" he asked, his voice carrying an edge. Lucy hesitated, suddenly aware of the attention focused on her. "I observe a lot of shooting on these ranges, sir. You start to notice patterns." For a tense moment, Steele said nothing, his eyes evaluating Lucy with new interest. Then he turned to Fisher. "Adjust your support elbow position, Doc. Let's see if Graham's observation has merit." Fisher, clearly skeptical, nevertheless made the suggested adjustment. His next 5-shot group at the 1,000-yard target showed immediate improvement, the rounds impacting much closer to center mass. "Well, I'll be damned," Fisher muttered, reviewing the target camera feed. He glanced back at Lucy with newfound respect. "Good eye." Steele studied the target results, then turned to Lucy. "Where did you learn to diagnose shooting form like that, Graham? That's not something you pick up just by watching." Before Lucy could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal too much of her background, Chief Petty Officer Harris jogged up to the firing line. "Commander Base Security is reporting unusual activity along the perimeter near the Eastern Access Road. Multiple unidentified individuals observed approaching the fence line." Steele immediately shifted into command mode. "Get the team ready. Full kit live ammunition. This could be nothing but given the current threat assessment." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone present was aware that naval installations had been placed on elevated alert status following intelligence reports of potential terrorist reconnaissance activities. Graham Steele addressed Lucy, "Secure the range equipment and then find shelter in the main building until we determine what's happening." "Yes, sir," she replied, already moving to collect the sensitive electronic equipment. As SEAL Team 8 rapidly prepared for a potential security threat, Lucy worked efficiently to secure the range. Years of practice with her grandfather had instilled in her the importance of proper equipment care, even, or especially during emergency situations. She was securing the last of the spotting scopes when the first explosion rocked the training complex. The initial blast came from the direction of the base's main administrative building, a thunderous detonation that sent a visible shockwave across the open ground of the range complex. Black smoke billowed skyward as secondary explosions followed in rapid succession. "Contact, contact," Harris shouted into his radio. "Multiple explosions at the admin building. Request immediate?" His transmission was cut short as a barrage of small arms fire erupted from the tree line bordering the eastern edge of the range. Bullets impacted the concrete barriers and kicked up dust from the ground around the SEAL team's position. "Take cover," Steele commanded, his voice carrying above the chaos. "Return fire, establish security perimeter." The team reacted with the precision expected of elite operators, taking defensive positions and returning coordinated fire toward the sources of the attack. But it quickly became apparent that they were facing a well-organized adversary who had carefully planned their assault. "Sir, we've got shooters on the northern ridge as well," Fisher reported, indicating the elevated terrain that overlooked the range complex. "Looks like they've established interlocking fields of fire. We're pinned down." Steele keyed his radio. "Base command, this is SEAL Team 8 actual. We are under attack at the Eastern Range complex. Multiple hostiles, coordinated fire, requesting immediate QRF response." The radio crackled with static before a response came through. "SEAL Team 8, this is base command. Confirmed attacks at multiple locations across the installation. Security forces engaged at main gate and administrative complex. QRF is mobilizing, but ETA to your position is approximately 15 minutes. Can you hold?" Steele surveyed their situation grimly. His team had taken cover behind concrete shooting barriers and equipment sheds, but their position offered limited protection against the elevated firing positions the attackers had secured. Already 2 of his men had sustained injuries. Petty Officer Jackson had taken a round through his upper arm, and Petty Officer Martinez had caught shrapnel from a near miss that had fragmented against concrete. "We'll hold as long as we can," Steele replied, "but be advised enemy has fire superiority from elevated positions. We are effectively pinned down." As the firefight intensified, Lucy had taken cover behind the range maintenance building. Her heart was pounding, but her mind was surprisingly clear. The situation was dire. The SEAL team was outnumbered and outpositioned, with limited ammunition and dwindling options for movement or counterattack. From her position, Lucy could see what the others couldn't: a third group of attackers moving through a drainage culvert that would bring them behind the SEAL team's defensive perimeter within minutes. If they succeeded, Steele and his men would be caught in a devastating crossfire with no viable escape route. Lucy made a rapid assessment of her available resources. The range maintenance building contained various tools and equipment, but nothing that would conventionally be considered a weapon. However, in the adjacent small arms locker used for storing demonstration weapons for training purposes, she knew there was at least one functional rifle, a modified M110 semi-automatic sniper rifle that had been prepared for a marksmanship demonstrations scheduled for later in the week. Making her decision, Lucy moved quickly to the arms locker. Using her maintenance keys, she accessed the secure storage area and located the M110 rifle case. Inside, as expected, was the weapon along with two magazines loaded with 7.62 mm ammunition. The rifle was similar to models she had trained with extensively on her grandfather's ranch, a civilian variant of the same platform, modified for competition shooting. The fundamental operation was identical, though this military version featured additional tactical accessories, including a suppressor and enhanced optics. Lucy quickly inspected the weapon, cycling the action to ensure it was functioning properly and confirming that the optics were at least approximately zeroed for mid-range engagement distances. It wasn't ideal. In a perfect world, she would have verified the exact zero for the specific ammunition load, but it would have to suffice under the circumstances. Slinging the rifle across her back, Lucy moved to a position where she could observe the drainage culvert without exposing herself to the existing fields of fire. From there, she could see three armed men advancing cautiously toward the rear of the SEAL team's position. They were approximately 300 yards away, a challenging shot under stress conditions, but well within the capabilities of both the rifle and a shooter of Lucy's caliber. She settled into a stable shooting position, using a maintenance equipment crate as an improvised rest. The familiar ritual of preparation flowed through her body: automatically check natural point of aim, establish proper cheek weld, regulate breathing, identify target, calculate basic ballistic factors. Wind is negligible at this distance. Target moving slowly right to left. Lead approximately 1/2 body width. No significant elevation change to account for. Lucy centered the crosshairs on the lead attacker, controlled her breathing as her grandfather had taught her, and pressed the trigger with deliberate precision. The rifle's report was partially muffled by the suppressor, barely audible above the ongoing gunfire. Through the scope, Lucy saw the lead attacker drop immediately, the round finding its mark center mass. The two remaining hostiles reacted with confusion, unable to identify the source of fire that had struck down their comrade. Before they could orient themselves or seek cover, Lucy had cycled through her shooting sequence twice more. Two more precision shots, two more hostiles neutralized. The entire engagement had taken less than 15 seconds. Without pausing to reflect on what she had just done, Lucy shifted her attention to the northern ridge, where the attackers maintaining fire superiority over the SEAL team were positioned. The distance was greater, approximately 600 yards, and the elevated position created a more challenging shooting solution. Uphill shot need to adjust for cosine angle. Approximately 15 degrees incline means impact will be slightly high if I don't compensate. Wind from the west at roughly 8 mph, requiring right-to-left drift compensation. Lucy made the necessary adjustments to the rifle's optic, then began systematically engaging the hostile positions on the ridge. Each shot was carefully calculated, her movements economical and precise. One by one, the enemy firing positions fell silent as her rounds found their targets. From their defensive position, Steele and his team noticed a change in the tactical situation. The incoming fire from the ridge had diminished significantly, though they couldn't identify why. "Someone's engaging the hostiles on the ridge," Fisher observed, peering through a gap in the concrete barrier. "Precision fire taking them out one by one. Must be advanced elements of the QRF." "Unlikely," Steele suggested, though he sounded uncertain. The shooting was too methodical, too precise to match the typical response of a quick reaction force. It was Harris who first spotted Lucy as she repositioned to engage the remaining threats on the eastern perimeter. "Sir, is that Graham?" Steele followed Harris's line of sight, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief as he recognized the range maintenance specialist now moving with tactical precision between cover positions, the M110 rifle held with obvious familiarity as she continued to systematically eliminate the attacking force. "What the hell?" Fisher muttered, articulating the thought shared by every member of the team. Before Steele could formulate a response or take action, his radio crackled again. "SEAL Team 8, this is Base Command. Be advised, security camera footage shows hostiles have breached the weapons storage facility. Intelligence suggests they may be attempting to access classified materials stored in the secure data center adjacent to the armory." The secure data center. Steele felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ongoing firefight. That facility contains some of the most sensitive operational information on the base, including mission files, personnel records, and details of forthcoming deployments. If the attackers gained access to those systems, the damage to national security could be incalculable. "Acknowledge Base Command. We will attempt to reinforce the data center, but we are still under heavy fire." ETA on that QRF. QRF is engaged at the main gate. Estimate another 10 minutes before they can reach your position. 10 minutes might as well have been 10 hours. If the attackers were already inside the weapons storage facility, they would reach the adjacent data center within minutes. Steele made a rapid tactical assessment. His team was pinned down, outgunned, and at least partially compromised by injuries. Moving to reinforce the data center would require crossing 200 meters of open ground under potential enemy fire. The risk was extreme. And then there was Graham, the civilian maintenance specialist, who was somehow single-handedly turning the tide of the firefight with shooting skills that rivaled or exceeded those of his most qualified operators. Making his decisions, Steele keyed his radio. "Graham, this is Commander Steele. If you can hear me, acknowledge." After a brief pause, Lucy's voice came through the channel. "This is Graham. Go ahead, Commander. What is your situation? Can you provide covering fire for my team to maneuver?" "Affirmative, sir. I've neutralized the northern ridge position and 3 hostiles attempting to flank your rear. Eastern perimeter still active, approximately 4 to 5 shooters remaining. I have visual and can suppress." Steele exchanged disbelieving glances with Fisher and Harris. The calm professionalism in Lucy's voice was completely at odds with her supposed role as a civilian range technician. "Copy that. On my signal, provide suppressing fire on the eastern perimeter. Team will bound toward the weapons facility to secure the data center." "Understood. Ready on your mark." Steele gathered his operators. "On my signal, we move in 2 elements. Harris, you take Jackson and Lewis. I'll take Fisher and Martinez. Tactical advance to the weapons facility. Graham will provide cover." The team acknowledged their orders, though their expressions still registered shock at the unexpected development of their range maintenance specialist providing tactical support. "Execute in 3, 2, 1 mark." As Steele gave the command, Lucy opened fire on the eastern perimeter. Her shots were precisely targeted to suppress the remaining hostiles without necessarily eliminating them, a different tactical application of marksmanship that prioritized volume and coverage over individual kills. Under her covering fire, SEAL Team 8 began their advance across the open ground, moving in coordinated bounds as they had trained countless times. Steele led his element forward, experiencing the surreal sensation of being protected by civilian maintenance personnel rather than dedicated military support. The team had covered approximately half the distance to the weapons facility when a new threat emerged. A hostile, armed with what appeared to be a light machine gun, appeared on the roof of an adjacent building, positioning to enfilade the advancing SEALs. "Machine gun high," Steele shouted, and already calculating that they would be caught in the open before they could reach cover. The machine gunner began to bring his weapon to bear and then jerked backward, his weapon clattering unfired to the rooftop as he collapsed. Through his peripheral vision, Steele caught the muzzle flash from Lucy's position over 700 yards from the rooftop target she had just neutralized with a single shot. The remainder of the advance proceeded without further incident, the team reaching the weapons facility entrance within minutes. The doors showed signs of forced entry, confirming that hostiles had indeed breached the building. "Graham, what's your visual on the facility?" Steele radioed. "I can observe the main entrance and east-facing windows," Lucy replied. "No movement visible from my position, but limited line of sight to interior." "Copy that. Maintain overwatch while we clear the building." With practiced efficiency, the SEAL team prepared to enter the facility. Steele took point with Fisher, covering their 6 as they moved through the breached entrance and began clearing the structure room by room. Evidence of the hostile presence was immediately apparent. 2 security personnel were down in the entry vestibule, and shell casings littered the floor, indicating a brief but intense firefight. Moving deeper into the facility, they encountered 3 dead hostiles, apparently taken out by the security team before being overwhelmed. As they approached the data center entrance, Steele detected voices from within, at least 2 individuals speaking in hushed tones. The language wasn't immediately recognizable, but the urgency in their voices suggested they were working against time. Steele signaled his team to prepare for breach entry. On his mark, Fisher kicked in the door while Harris tossed a flashbang grenade into the room. The disorienting explosion was followed immediately by the team's entry weapons raised and ready to engage. Inside, they found 3 hostiles, 2 still disoriented from the flashbang, while a third was already recovering, raising his weapon toward the entering SEALs. Steele neutralized the immediate threat with 2 center mass shots before the team secured the remaining hostiles. A quick assessment confirmed the data center's primary systems appeared intact, though one of the hostiles had been attempting to connect an external device to the main server, likely to download classified information. Base Command, this is SEAL Team 8 Actual. Data center secure. 3 hostiles neutralized. Server systems appear intact. Request technical team to verify no data compromise. Copy that, SEAL Team 8. Technical response team en route. QRF has secured the main gate and is proceeding to your location to establish perimeter security. With the immediate crisis contained, Steele found his thoughts returning to the unexpected intervention that had potentially saved his entire team and prevented a catastrophic security breach. Harris maintained security here. Fisher with me. Steele headed back outside, intent on finding the woman who had demonstrated capabilities that no range maintenance specialist should possess. They found Lucy near the original range position, methodically clearing the M110 rifle and returning it to its case. Her movements were precise and practiced, the kind of weapons handling that came only from years of experience. As Steele approached, Lucy straightened her expression, composed but wary. "Sir," she acknowledged, her voice betraying none of the adrenaline that must have been coursing through her system after the intense firefight. Steele studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Graham, I think you owe us an explanation." Lucy met his gaze steadily. "Yes, sir, I suppose I do. Where did you learn to shoot like that? That wasn't just good marksmanship. That was expert-level precision under combat conditions, the kind of skill that takes years of specialized training to develop." Lucy hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. Finally, she reached into her pocket and removed a worn photograph, handing it to Steele. The photograph showed a younger version of Lucy standing beside an older man in civilian clothes, both holding precision rifles on what appeared to be a private shooting range. The man's bearing was unmistakably military despite the civilian attire. "My grandfather," Lucy explained, "Master Sergeant Warren Ghost Eye Graham, Army Rangers. He served from 1968 to 1983, including operations in Vietnam, Central America, and the Middle East." Steele's eyes widened in recognition. "Ghost Eye Graham, the sniper from Operation Eagle Claw." Lucy nodded, surprised that Steele knew the reference. "You've heard of him. Every serious student of special operations history knows that name," Steele replied. "He was credited with over 100 confirmed kills during sanctioned operations and rumored to have developed advanced marksmanship techniques still taught in modified form today." He looked at Lucy with new understanding. "He was your grandfather?" "Yes, sir. He raised me after my parents divorced, taught me everything he knew about precision, shooting fieldcraft, and tactical assessment every weekend from the time I was 8 years old until I left for college." Fisher, who had been listening to the exchange, interjected. "Why are you working maintenance at a SEAL training facility instead of putting those skills to use, with that kind of training and obvious natural ability?" Lucy's expression hardened slightly. "I tried Petty Officer Fisher. Perfect scores on every marksmanship evaluation during recruitment, top percentile in physical fitness assessments. But when it came to placement in advanced training programs," she shrugged. "Let's just say the doors to certain specialties remain difficult for women to open regardless of qualification." Steele absorbed this information, his tactical mind reassessing everything he thought he knew about the quiet woman who had maintained their ranges for over 2 years. The implications were profound, not just for his understanding of Lucy Graham, but for the broader question of how the military identified and utilized talent. Before he could respond, his radio activated again. "Commander Steele, this is Captain Westfield. Report to the command center immediately. We have a situation developing that requires your attention." "Acknowledge. On my way." Steele turned back to Lucy. "This conversation isn't over, Graham. Stay available." As Steele departed with Fisher, Lucy remained by the range equipment, the adrenaline of combat finally beginning to ebb from her system. For 2 years, she had maintained her cover as just another civilian contractor, invisible to the operators who trained on her ranges. Now, in the space of 30 minutes, everything had changed. What she couldn't know was that the morning's events were merely the opening move in a much larger and more dangerous game, one that would force her to confront not only institutional barriers, but also buried secrets from her grandfather's past that had never been meant to see the light of day. A black SUV with government plates pulled up near the range building. A tall, distinguished man in his mid-60s stepped out, scanning the area with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to assessing tactical situations. His uniform bore the insignia of a full colonel, and though Lucy had never seen him before, something about his bearing triggered a distant memory. The colonel's gaze locked onto Lucy, his expression unreadable as he studied her for a long moment. Then he approached his stride, purposeful and commanding. "Miss Graham," he said, his voice carrying the gravitas of decades of authority. "I'm Colonel Richard Coleman, Defense Intelligence Agency. I understand you played a rather unexpected role in today's events." Lucy felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. As she looked into Coleman's eyes, she saw the photograph from her grandfather's journal flash in her mind, the young officer standing next to her grandfather, now aged by decades but unmistakable. And in that moment, Lucy Graham realized that the attack on Naval Base Coronado wasn't random at all. It was connected to her grandfather, to secrets buried for decades and somehow, inexplicably, to her. The ghost had just become visible, and the consequences would be far-reaching indeed. The base command center was a hive of controlled chaos when Steele arrived. Multiple screens displayed security camera feeds from across the installation, while communications personnel coordinated response efforts with various units and agencies. Captain Thomas Westfield, the base commander, stood at the central tactical table, his expression grave as he examined a digital map of the facility with key areas highlighted in red. "Commander Steele, join us." Westfield gestured Steele forward. "What's your assessment of the attack on the data center?" Steele provided a concise briefing on the tactical situation his team had encountered, including the neutralization of the hostile force and the securing of the data systems. He deliberately omitted any mention of Lucy Graham's involvement, preferring to address that situation separately after he had more information. "The attack was coordinated and well-planned," Steele concluded. "These weren't common terrorists or opportunistic criminals. Their tactics, equipment, and target selection all suggest advanced training and specific intelligence about the base layout and security protocols." Westfield nodded grimly. "That aligns with our preliminary analysis. FBI counterterrorism is already en route, but initial indications suggest this wasn't an ideologically motivated attack. This was a targeted operation with specific objectives." He gestured to one of the intelligence officers. "Lieutenant Chen briefed Commander Steele on what we found." Lieutenant Chen stepped forward, tablet in hand. "Sir, we've completed initial identification of the neutralized hostiles. They're not affiliated with any known terrorist organization. In fact, several have backgrounds in private military contracting with employment histories linked to Black River Security Group." "Black River," Steele frowned. "That's a legitimate PMC with government contracts. Why would their people be attacking a U.S. naval installation?" "That's the question, sir," Chen replied. "Even more concerning is what we found on one of the hostiles attempting to access the data center." She handed Steele a plastic evidence bag containing what appeared to be a military identification card. The card showed signs of age with a photograph of a man in his 30s wearing an army dress uniform. "This appears to be an authentic military ID from the early 1980s, Chen explained. "The name on the ID is Frank Wilson, former U.S. Army Captain Special Forces. According to our records, Captain Wilson and his entire team were killed during an operation in Somalia in '93. Steele stared at the ID, a cold sensation spreading through his chest. Clearly, the reports of his death were exaggerated. "That's not all, sir," Chen continued. "When we began searching our databases for any reference to Captain Wilson, we found something unusual. His service record has been heavily redacted with entire operations completely blacked out. But one name appeared in connection with his final mission in Somalia, a mission that officially never happened." "What name?" Steele asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. "Master Sergeant Warren Graham, codenamed Ghost Eye. According to fragmentary records, Graham was somehow connected to the Somalia operation, though the exact nature of his involvement is unclear due to redactions." Steele's mind raced as he processed this information. Warren Graham, the grandfather of the civilian range technician who had demonstrated extraordinary combat capabilities just hours earlier. The coincidence was too significant to ignore. He was about to speak when Colonel Richard Coleman entered the command center, followed by Lucy Graham. The colonel's presence commanded immediate attention, silence falling over the room as he approached the tactical table. "Captain Westfield," Coleman addressed the base commander, "I'll be taking over the investigation into this incident effective immediately. This is now a matter of national security under DIA jurisdiction." Westfield's expression tightened slightly at the abrupt assertion of authority, but he nodded in acknowledgement. Of course, Colonel. My staff is at your disposal. Coleman turned to Steele, his gaze calculating. Commander, I understand your team secured the data center. Excellent work under difficult circumstances. Thank you, sir, Steele replied, carefully studying the older man. Something about Coleman's demeanor set off warning bells in Steele's tactical instincts. The colonel was too composed, too unsurprised by the morning's events. Coleman gestured to Lucy, who stood silently beside him. I've been briefed on Ms. Graham's unexpected contribution to today's defense. Quite remarkable. She saved my team, sir, Steele stated plainly. Without her intervention, we would have been overrun. Coleman's smile didn't reach his eyes. Indeed, a fortunate coincidence that someone with such specialized skills happened to be in exactly the right place at the right time. Before Steele could respond, a communications officer called out from across the room. Colonel Coleman, secure call for you on Channel 1. Excuse me? Coleman said, moving toward a private communication station. Steele took the opportunity to approach Lucy. Are you all right? He asked quietly. Lucy's face was composed, but Steele could see tension in her eyes. That man knew my grandfather, she whispered. He was in the photograph I found last night, the one from Eagle Falls. Steele processed this information quickly. You're certain? Positive. He's older now, but it's him. Lucy's voice remained steady, but her fingers trembled slightly. Commander, something isn't right. The timing of this attack, that ID card with Wilson's name, now Coleman, showing up. I know, Steele agreed. Stay close to me. Don't volunteer any information to Coleman that you don't have to. Coleman returned to the tactical table, his expression grim. Captain Westfield, I need to conduct a debriefing with Ms. Graham and Commander Steele immediately. Is there a secure room available? You can use my office, Westfield offered. It's swept daily for surveillance devices. Excellent. Commander, Ms. Graham, if you would follow me. As they walked through the corridors of the command building, Steele positioned himself subtly between Lucy and Coleman, a protective gesture that wasn't lost on the young woman. When they reached Westfield's office, Coleman closed the door firmly behind them and engaged the privacy lock. Please sit down. Coleman indicated the chairs in front of Westfield's desk. He remained standing, looking down at them with an expression of authority honed over decades in the intelligence community. Mr. Graham, Coleman began. I understand you're the granddaughter of Master Sergeant Warren Graham. Yes, sir, Lucy replied cautiously, and you've maintained his personal effects since his death 5 years ago, including his journals and operational records. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. Lucy felt a chill run down her spine. How could Coleman possibly know about her grandfather's journals? My grandfather left me some personal items, she acknowledged carefully. Family mementos. Coleman's expression hardened slightly. Ms. Graham, let's not waste time. Your grandfather was one of the most skilled operators in U.S. military history, but he was also involved in certain sensitive matters that remain classified to this day. The attack on this installation was not random. It was specifically targeted at retrieving documentation that your grandfather secured before his death, documentation that would be extremely damaging to national security if it fell into the wrong hands. Steele leaned forward. Sir, with respect, what does this have to do with today's attack? Ms. Graham is a civilian contractor who happened to possess skills that saved American lives today. Why is she being treated like a suspect? Coleman turned his attention to Steele. Commander, I understand your protective instinct towards someone who assisted your team. It's commendable, but you're not cleared for the full context of this situation. He paused, seeming to reconsider. However, given your involvement and your team's potential exposure to sensitive information, I'll provide what context I can. He moved to the window, looking out at the base where smoke still rose from damaged buildings. In '93, a classified operation in Somalia went catastrophically wrong. A team led by Captain Frank Wilson, including Warren Graham as the designated marksman, was compromised during an intelligence gathering mission. Official records indicate the entire team was killed in action. The reality is more complicated. Lucy felt her heartbeat quicken. Her grandfather had never spoken about Somalia, had never mentioned Frank Wilson by name. Yet here was Coleman casually discussing an operation that had been buried in the deepest shadows of military history. What reality, sir? Steele prompted when Coleman paused. Coleman turned back to face them. The reality, Commander, is that Captain Wilson survived that operation, though he was believed dead. For 30 years, he's been operating outside official channels, gathering what he believes is evidence of conspiracy within U.S. intelligence agencies. Your grandfather, Ms. Graham, was his closest ally in this misguided crusade. Lucy couldn't contain herself any longer. My grandfather was a patriot who served his country honorably for decades. Yes, he was, Coleman agreed, surprising her. Warren Graham was one of the finest soldiers I ever had the privilege to command. But after Somalia, something changed. He became paranoid, convinced that the mission had been deliberately compromised from within. He began documenting his theories, collecting what he believed was evidence of a vast conspiracy. And you believe the attackers today were after my grandfather's documentation? Lucy asked, carefully controlling her voice. I don't believe it, Ms. Graham. I know it. Coleman's certainty was chilling. Intelligence intercepts over the past month indicated that Wilson has resurfaced after decades in hiding. He's been attempting to contact former associates, gathering resources for some kind of operation. Today's attack bears all the hallmarks of his tactical approach: multiple simultaneous points of attack, precision targeting of high-value facilities, detailed intelligence on security protocols. Steele frowned. You're suggesting that a former U.S. Army captain orchestrated a terrorist attack on a naval installation. Wilson is not the man he once was, Commander. 30 years in the shadows believing your own government betrayed you, it changes a person. Coleman focused his attention back on Lucy. Ms. Graham, did your grandfather ever mention Wilson to you? Did he ever discuss the documentation he was keeping? Lucy thought carefully before answering. Coleman clearly knew more than he was revealing, but she couldn't determine if he was an ally or a threat. My grandfather rarely discussed his operational history with me. He taught me practical skills, marksmanship, fieldcraft, survival techniques, but he kept the details of his service private. Coleman studied her face, clearly searching for signs of deception. And yet you possess his journals. Family keepsakes, Lucy repeated firmly. Shooting logs, ballistic calculations, nothing classified. A tense silence filled the room as Coleman weighed his next move. Finally, he sighed. Ms. Graham, I respected your grandfather enormously. We served together for many years through some of the most challenging operations of the Cold War. Whatever he may have believed in his later years, Warren Graham was a patriot and a hero. I have no desire to tarnish his legacy or to cause difficulties for his family. His tone became more conciliatory. But the documentation he accumulated poses a genuine threat to national security, particularly in the current geopolitical climate. It contains names of operatives still in the field, details of ongoing intelligence operations, and information that could compromise U.S. interests globally. We need to secure it before Wilson or his associates can use it for their own purposes. Lucy met Coleman's gaze steadily. What exactly are you asking me to do, Colonel? I'm asking you to cooperate with a matter of national security, Coleman replied smoothly. To turn over any documentation your grandfather left in your possession and to assist us in understanding what Wilson might be planning next. Steele had remained silent, observing the exchange with the careful attention of a seasoned operator. Now he spoke up. Sir, Monsieur, Graham has been through a traumatic experience today. She needs time to process what's happened and to consider what you're asking. Coleman frowned. Time is a luxury we don't have, Commander. If Wilson has identified Ms. Graham as the custodian of her grandfather's records, she may be in danger. The attack today failed, but Wilson isn't known for abandoning his objectives. Then provide security for Ms. Graham while she considers her options, Steele countered. After all, she's a civilian who just saved American lives and government property. Surely that earns her some consideration. Coleman studied Steele with new interest, clearly reassessing the SEAL commander. Very well, he conceded finally. Ms. Graham, I'll arrange for a security detail to escort you to your residence. You can gather any materials related to your grandfather, and we'll meet again this evening to discuss next steps. Thank you, Colonel, Lucy replied, keeping her expression neutral despite the turmoil of emotions beneath the surface. Coleman moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Ms. Graham. The skills you demonstrated today were impressive. Your grandfather trained you well, but this is not a game or a shooting competition. The people involved in this situation are highly trained, extremely dangerous, and utterly committed to their cause. For your own safety, please do not attempt to investigate this matter on your own. With that warning delivered, Coleman left the office, closing the door behind him. The moment they were alone, Steele turned to Lucy. "You don't trust him." It wasn't a question, but Lucy answered anyway. "No, I don't know why, but something feels wrong about all of this. The way he knows about my grandfather's journals, the timing of the attack, his immediate appearance afterward." "I agree," Steele said quietly. "My instincts are telling me Coleman isn't being entirely truthful. The question is, what's his real agenda?" Lucy thought for a moment. "Commander, I need to get to my apartment. There's something in my grandfather's journal that might help make sense of all this entries about Eagle Falls and Somalia that I've never fully understood." "You think they're connected to today's attack?" "I'm certain of it. The photograph I found last night, Coleman's appearance today, it can't be coincidence." Steele made a quick decision. "I'll escort you personally. Coleman mentioned a security detail, but I don't want you alone with people we can't trust until we understand what's really happening here." "Thank you," Lucy said, genuine gratitude in her voice. As they left Westfield's office, Lucy felt a weight settling on her shoulders, the weight of her grandfather's legacy and secrets she hadn't known she was carrying. Whatever was in those journals had been important enough for someone to attack a naval base to obtain. The question was whether that someone was Frank Wilson, as Coleman claimed, or someone else entirely. Yeah. Lucy's apartment building looked exactly as she had left it that morning, though it felt like a lifetime ago. As Steele parked his personal vehicle in the visitor's space, he scanned the surrounding area with the practiced eye of a special operator. "No obvious surveillance," he noted, "but that doesn't mean we're not being watched. We should move quickly." They entered the building and took the stairs rather than the elevator, another tactical precaution that Lucy appreciated. At her door, she paused, key in hand. "Something's wrong," she whispered, pointing to a nearly imperceptible scratch on the lock mechanism. "Someone's been here." Steele immediately shifted into combat mode, positioning himself between Lucy and the door. "Stay behind me," he instructed quietly, drawing a compact sidearm from a concealed holster. With practiced efficiency, he tested the door, finding it unlocked. A subtle push revealed it was partially open. He exchanged a quick glance with Lucy, who nodded her readiness. In one smooth motion, Steele pushed the door open and entered in a tactical stance, weapon raised. "U.S. Navy hands where I can see them." Lucy followed immediately behind him, scanning the apartment with the heightened awareness her grandfather had drilled into her over years of training. The living room was undisturbed, but she could hear movement from the bedroom. A tall, lean man dressed in nondescript dark clothing emerged from the bedroom doorway. Unlike the attackers at the naval base, this individual moved with the precise economy of a trained professional. As Steele and Lucy burst in, he was already in motion, diving behind the sofa for cover. "Armed," Steele called out, shifting his position to maintain a line of sight on the intruder. The man raised a handgun, a suppressed Sig Sauer by Lucy's quick assessment, but didn't immediately fire. Instead, he called out in a calm, measured voice that carried a hint of an accent Lucy couldn't immediately place. "Commander Steele, I presume I have been expecting you." Steele maintained his aim, his expression hardening. "Identify yourself." "That's complicated," the man replied. "But the young lady might recognize my face, if not my name." He slowly raised his free hand to remove the dark cap and glasses that had partially obscured his features. As they fell away, Lucy felt a jolt of recognition. "You're the man from the photograph," she breathed, "standing next to my grandfather." "Wilson." The man inclined his head slightly. "Captain Frank Wilson, though I haven't used that name in many years." His gaze shifted back to Steele. "I'm not here to hurt anyone, Commander. Quite the opposite." "Put the weapon down," Steele ordered, his aim unwavering. Slowly, Wilson complied, placing his pistol on the floor and sliding it away from himself. "May I stand? This position is hell on my knees these days." Steele gestured with his weapon. "Slowly. Hands where I can see them." As Wilson rose, Lucy studied him more carefully. The man before her was in his mid-60s, with the weathered features of someone who had spent much of his life outdoors in harsh conditions. His posture and movements suggested military training, but there was something else, a wariness, a hypervigilance that spoke of years spent looking over his shoulder. "Why are you here?" Lucy demanded. "Why were your men attacking the naval base?" Wilson's expression hardened. "Those weren't my men, Ms. Graham. If I had wanted to breach the data center, I wouldn't have sent a frontal assault against a facility full of SEALs." "Then who were they?" Steele asked, his weapon still trained on Wilson's chest. "Mercenaries. Hired guns using my old identity as cover. Wilson's gaze returned to Lucy. They were after the same thing, I am your grandfather's journal. Lucy felt a chill run through her. How do you know about that? Because Warren told me about it before he died. He was my friend for 30 years, Ms. Graham. One of the few people in this world I trusted completely. The sound of movement in the hallway caught their attention. Wilson's hand moved instinctively toward his waistband before he remembered his weapon was on the floor. You were followed, he said grimly. Steele moved to the window, carefully peering through the blinds. 3 SUVs, government plates, armed personnel deploying in a tactical formation. He turned back to the group, his expression grim. They're not here for a social call. Coleman, Wilson hissed. He's moving faster than I anticipated. He must have tracked you from the base. Steele made a rapid tactical assessment. We need an exit strategy. There's a maintenance access to the roof, Lucy said, already moving. From there we can cross to the adjacent building. My grandfather made me map every escape route when I moved in. Wilson nodded approvingly. Warren taught you well. Steele made his decision. Graham, Wilson, grab only what's essential. We move in 30 seconds. Lucy quickly retrieved her grandfather's journal and a few key items from the wooden box, transferring them into a small backpack. As she zipped it closed, she noticed Wilson retrieving his sidearm and checking it with practiced efficiency. I thought you weren't here to hurt anyone, she observed. Wilson met her gaze without flinching. I'm not, but neither am I planning to be taken by Coleman's people. Some fates are worse than death, Miss Graham. Your grandfather understood that. Before Lucy could respond, Steele signaled that it was time to move. Wilson led the way to a utility closet that concealed the maintenance access to the roof. The narrow metal ladder ascended through a shaft barely wide enough for an adult to navigate. Lucy went first, followed by Wilson, with Steele covering their rear. The climb was awkward with the backpack, but Lucy's athletic conditioning made it manageable. As they emerged onto the rooftop, the evening air cool against their faces, Lucy could hear the faint sounds of commotion from below. Raised voices, the crackle of radios, the distinctive cadence of federal agents identifying themselves. This way, she directed, leading them across the flat roof toward the adjacent apartment building, which stood approximately 8 feet away across an alley. Steele assessed the gap. Doable, he concluded. Wilson, can you make that jump? The older man snorted. I may be in my 60s, Commander, but I've been keeping myself operational. I'll manage. Lucy went first again, taking a short run before launching herself across the gap. She landed solidly on the neighboring rooftop, rolling to distribute the impact as her grandfather had taught her. Wilson followed with surprising agility for his age, executing a similar landing. Steele was preparing to make the jump when the roof access door behind him burst open. 2 men in tactical gear emerged, weapons raised. Freeze, federal agents. Instead of complying, Steele launched himself across the gap just as the agents opened fire. Bullets impacted the concrete rooftop as he landed hard on the other side, immediately rolling for cover behind a rooftop air conditioning unit. Go, he shouted to Lucy and Wilson. I'll cover you. Wilson grabbed Lucy's arm, pulling her toward the maintenance door that would lead them into the adjacent building. He's right. We need to move now. Lucy hesitated, reluctant to leave Steele behind. He's a SEAL, Ms. Graham, Wilson urged. This is what they train for. The best way to help him is to secure that journal and expose Coleman before he can bury the truth again. The logic was sound, even if it felt wrong to abandon Steele. Lucy nodded sharply and followed Wilson through the maintenance door, descending the stairs rapidly as the sound of gunfire continued above them. They emerged into a residential hallway, startling an elderly woman who was just exiting her apartment. Wilson smiled reassuringly instantly, transforming his demeanor from hardened operative to harmless senior citizen. So sorry to startle you, ma'am. Maintenance was checking the roof access. All fixed now. His voice was warm, his body language non-threatening. The woman nodded uncertainly and continued on her way, casting suspicious glances over her shoulder. Where to now? Lucy asked quietly as they reached the building's main lobby. Wilson scanned the street through the glass doors. Coleman's people will have the area surrounded by now. We need transportation. Lucy spotted a delivery driver unloading packages from a van parked directly in front of the building. I have an idea. Without waiting for Wilson's response, she pushed through the doors and approached the driver with a friendly smile. Excuse me, are you delivering to apartment 304? That's me, but I'm heading out. I can save you a trip upstairs. The driver harried and clearly behind schedule barely glanced at her. Graham 304. That's me, Lucy confirmed, noting with relief that her name was indeed on one of the packages. Sign here. The driver thrust a digital tablet toward her. As Lucy signed, Wilson approached casually from behind, subtly removing the keys from the van's ignition, where the distracted driver had left them. The entire exchange took less than 30 seconds, after which the driver handed Lucy her package and turned to retrieve more from the back of the van. Now, Wilson murmured, and they both moved swiftly to the vehicle. Wilson slid into the driver's seat while Lucy took the passenger side. The engine started with a rumble, and Wilson pulled away from the curb before the confused driver could fully process what was happening. "Hey!" the man shouted, running a few steps after them before stopping in bewilderment. Wilson navigated through the residential streets with calm precision, avoiding main thoroughfares where roadblocks might be established. "We need to get clear of the immediate area, then we'll abandon this vehicle and acquire less conspicuous transportation." Lucy nodded, her training kicking in despite the surreal nature of the situation. "What about Commander Steele?" "If he evades capture, he'll establish contact through secure channels," Wilson replied. "If not," he shrugged. "Commander Steele strikes me as someone who can take care of himself in difficult situations." Lucy wasn't entirely satisfied with this assessment, but recognized the pragmatic reality. Her attention turned to the backpack in her lap containing her grandfather's journal and the secrets that had apparently set these events in motion. "Where are we going?" she asked. Wilson's expression remained focused on the road ahead. "Somewhere safe, somewhere your grandfather and I established years ago as a fallback position if the truth about Eagle Falls and Somalia ever resurfaced." "And then what?" "Then," Wilson said grimly, "we open that journal and find the evidence needed to bring down Richard Coleman before he can acquire enough power to make himself untouchable." As they drove into the gathering darkness, Lucy felt as if she had crossed an invisible threshold, leaving behind the carefully constructed life she had maintained for the past 2 years, and stepping fully into the shadowy world her grandfather had prepared her for since childhood. Whether that preparation would be enough to survive what lay ahead remained to be seen. Colonel Richard Coleman paced the confines of the secure communications room, his weathered features set in an expression of controlled fury. The monitors before him displayed real-time updates from the field teams deployed to Lucy Graham's apartment complex, none of which contained the news he wanted to hear. "What do you mean escaped?" he demanded into the secure phone. "You had a full tactical team against 3 individuals, one of whom is a civilian woman." The response from the other end did nothing to improve his mood. Coleman terminated the call with a vicious jab at the screen and turned to face Captain Westfield, who had been observing the exchange with increasing concern. "This situation is rapidly deteriorating," Coleman stated flatly. "Graham Steele and an unidentified accomplice have evaded our security teams. Worse, they've acquired documentation that may compromise ongoing national security operations." Westfield frowned. "What documentation exactly?" "I was led to understand this was about historical operations from the 1980s and 90s. How does that constitute a current national security threat?" Coleman's expression remained carefully neutral, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. "The past informs the present, Captain. Certain historical operations have continuing implications for current intelligence protocols and relationships." "I see," Westfield replied, though his tone suggested he found the explanation less than satisfactory. "And Commander Steele's involvement, he's one of my most trusted officers." "Caught up in something he doesn't understand," Coleman dismissed, "or possibly compromised by his association with Graham. Either way, he's interfering with a classified DIA operation and will face appropriate consequences when apprehended." Westfield straightened his military bearing, becoming more pronounced. "With respect, Colonel, I find it difficult to believe that Steele would knowingly interfere with legitimate security operations. His record is exemplary." "Even exemplary officers can be misled by compelling narratives," Coleman countered smoothly. "Graham has clearly spun a convincing tale based on her grandfather's biased accounts." Before Westfield could respond, the secure phone chimed again. Coleman answered, listening intently before his expression hardened further. "Understood. Implement protocol Obsidian immediately. Full surveillance activation priority 1. He ended the call and turned to Westfield. "Captain, I need to commandeer additional resources from your security division. This situation has been escalated to a national security priority. On whose authority, Tio? Westfield challenged his patience, visibly wearing thin. Coleman withdrew a folded document from his inner pocket and handed it to the captain. Director of National Intelligence, countersigned by the Secretary of Defense. I'm activating a joint task force with full operational autonomy. Westfield scanned the document, his expression growing increasingly troubled. This is extraordinarily broad authority, Colonel. Almost unlimited resources and minimal oversight. The threat justifies the response, Coleman stated, simply retrieving the document. I'll establish my command center here unless you have objections. It wasn't truly a question, and both men knew it. Westfield had just been effectively sidelined in his own facility. No objections, the captain replied stiffly. I'll inform my staff to provide whatever assistance you require. As Westfield departed, Coleman returned to the secure communications console, entering a series of access codes that connected him to a classified network few within the military or intelligence community knew existed. Keystone secure, he stated once the connection was established. Situation update, Ghost Eye's documentation has been compromised. Primary asset Warren Graham deceased. Secondary asset Lucy Graham, current status, fugitive in possession of critical documentation. Accompanied by unknown accomplice and Naval Commander Max Steele. He paused, listening to the response through his earpiece. Yes, I understand the implications. Full containment, protocol authorized. Primary objective, recover or destroy Ghost Eye's journal. Secondary objective, neutralize all parties with knowledge of its contents. Another pause. Yes, including Steele. No witnesses, no loose ends. Coleman terminated the connection and stood motionless for a moment, staring at the satellite imagery of San Diego displayed on the main screen. Somewhere in that urban landscape, Lucy Graham was carrying documentation that could end his career and worse, expose operations that the American public was never meant to know about, operations that had been necessary regardless of their moral ambiguity or legal standing. Operations that had protected American interests when conventional approaches had failed. Warren Graham had been a complication, a skilled operator whose conscience had eventually overcome his conditioning. Coleman had managed that threat through careful monitoring and strategic pressure points. But Lucy Graham represented a different kind of danger, someone outside the system immune to the leverage that kept most potential whistleblowers in check. She would have to be dealt with permanently along with anyone who aided her. Coleman activated a different communication channel. This is Keystone. Activate all sleeper assets in the San Diego area. Priority target Lucy Graham. Rules of engagement unrestricted. As acknowledgments filtered in from various field teams, Coleman allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. The machinery he had spent decades building was now fully engaged. It was only a matter of time before Lucy Graham discovered that despite her grandfather's training, she was hopelessly outmatched against the resources he could bring to bear. What Coleman couldn't know was that his quarry had already connected with the one person who understood his methodologies intimately, because that person had helped develop them decades earlier before becoming their target. The abandoned ranch house stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, its weathered exterior blending seamlessly with the rugged terrain surrounding it. Located 30 miles east of San Diego in the sparsely populated backcountry, the property was officially owned by a shell corporation that, if traced diligently enough, would eventually lead to a deceased attorney who had once represented certain classified government interests. Wilson pulled the battered pickup truck, their third vehicle exchange since fleeing the apartment, onto the property via a nearly invisible access road. The truck's headlights were off, Wilson navigating solely by moonlight and memory. This is it, Lucy asked skeptically as they approached the dilapidated structure. Doesn't look particularly secure. Wilson allowed himself a thin smile. That's rather the point. Appearances can be deceiving, something your grandfather understood better than most. He parked behind the house, concealing the vehicle from casual observation from the main road, though the chances of random passers-by were minimal in this isolated location. Stay alert, Wilson advised as they exited the truck. This location hasn't been accessed in years. Need to make sure it hasn't been compromised. Lucy nodded instinctively, scanning their surroundings as her grandfather had taught her. The terrain offered multiple defensive advantages, clear lines of sight in all directions, elevated position, relative to the approaching road, natural features that could provide cover if needed. Wilson led her to what appeared to be a cellar entrance at the rear of the house. Rather than heading down the weathered wooden steps, however, he moved to a seemingly unremarkable section of the foundation wall and pressed a specific sequence of bricks. A soft click emanated from within the wall, and a section of the foundation swung inward, revealing a narrow passage descending into darkness. Your grandfather's design, Wilson explained. Warren always did have a flair for the theatrical when it came to operational security. He produced a flashlight and led the way into the passage, Lucy following close behind. The air was cool and dry, with a faint metallic scent that suggested sophisticated air filtration. After descending approximately 20 feet, the passage opened into a surprisingly modern facility, a reinforced concrete bunker, roughly 30 feet square, equipped with basic living amenities, communications equipment, though clearly dated, and what appeared to be a small armory secured behind a steel cage. Welcome to Ghost Station, Wilson announced, activating the bunker's power systems. Efficient LED lighting illuminated the space, revealing additional details as topographical maps on one wall, a medical treatment area in one corner, and a secure document safe embedded in the concrete. My grandfather built this, Lucy asked, surveying the facility with newfound appreciation for the depth of Warren Graham's preparations. Designed it, Wilson corrected. I handled the actual construction through cutouts and contractors who never knew what they were really building. He gestured around the space. This was one of 3 such facilities Warren established after Somalia. Places where evidence could be secured, operations planned, and if necessary, a person could disappear for extended periods. Lucy absorbed this information, reconciling the grandfather she had known with the man who had created such elaborate contingency measures. He never mentioned any of this to me. He wouldn't have, Wilson replied, moving to a small kitchenette area and examining the supplies. Warren compartmentalized rigorously. You were trained in combat skills and fieldcraft, but kept separate from his contingency planning. It was his way of protecting you. From what exactly? Lucy pressed, setting her backpack containing the journal on a metal table in the center of the room. Wilson paused, his expression growing distant. From the knowledge that the government he served for most of his life ultimately betrayed him, betrayed all of us for political expediency. He turned to face her fully. From the burden of carrying evidence that could destroy careers and possibly destabilize certain international relationships if it ever came to light. Lucy unzipped the backpack and carefully removed her grandfather's journal. Then perhaps it's time I understood exactly what this evidence contains. Wilson nodded solemnly. Yes, I believe it is. But first we need to establish secure communication with the Commander Steele, assuming he evaded capture. How? We don't have any way to contact him. Wilson moved to what appeared to be an outdated computer system in the corner of the bunker. Your grandfather and I established certain protocols for situations like this, emergency communication channels that exist outside conventional networks. As Wilson activated the system, Lucy opened the journal, finally ready to confront the secrets her grandfather had entrusted to her, knowingly or not. The first pages contained what appeared to be standard operational notes, training regimens, equipment specifications, tactical observations. But as she progressed deeper into the journal, the entries became more specific, more troubling. One entry dated April 18, 1980, caught her attention immediately. Eagle Falls initiated, team composition: myself, Wilson, Hernandez, Davies, Kowalski, handler Coleman. Primary objective: eliminate security elements along extraction route for main Eagle Claw force. Secondary objective: classified even from team, recover documentation from source Redwood regarding Soviet advisory presence. Coleman emphasized secondary objective takes priority if compromise occurs. Troubling directive contradicts standard protocol for personnel recovery. Wilson shares my concerns but maintains operational security. Will proceed as ordered but documenting divergence from established parameters. Lucy looked up from the journal. There was a secondary objective for Eagle Falls that wasn't shared with the full team. Wilson had finished his work at the computer terminal and rejoined her at the table. Yes, standard compartmentalization, or so we thought at the time. It wasn't until later that we realized the significance of that secondary objective. Lucy continued reading, finding entries that documented the chaotic aftermath of the aborted Eagle Claw mission. April 25, 1980, main mission aborted, received order to extract, but Coleman countermanded, instructed to proceed with secondary objective, despite changed circumstances. Wilson objects but complies under protest. Team morale deteriorating as extraction window closes. April 26, 1980, reached Redwood Rendezvous. Contact compromised. Firefight resulted in 3 casualties. Hernandez and Davies KIA, Kowalski critically wounded. Secured documentation but at unacceptable cost. Coleman orders immediate extraction, leaving Kowalski despite stabilization possibilities. Wilson and I overruled extracted with Kowalski against orders. April 30, 1980, debriefed separately from Wilson. Instructed to omit Redwood objective and Coleman's extraction order regarding Kowalski from official report. Ethical conflict, but complying for now while documenting actual events here. Kowalski died during medical transport. Coleman claims no knowledge of modified extraction orders. First indication of pattern that would become clear years later. Lucy felt a cold anger building as she read. Coleman abandoned wounded personnel and then lied about it in official reports. Wilson's expression darkened with old pain. That was just the beginning. Eagle Falls was the first operation where we saw Coleman's true nature, but it wouldn't be the last. Lucy turned to later entries, finding references to operations throughout the 1980s Nicaragua, Lebanon, various classified missions in Eastern Europe as the Cold War entered its final phases. Throughout, her grandfather documented a pattern of increasingly questionable decisions by Coleman, particularly regarding intelligence sources and civilian casualties. Then she reached the entries regarding Somalia dated early 1993, January 15, 1993, briefed for deniable operation in Mogadishu, extraction of intelligence asset with critical information on clan weapon supplies. Coleman handling personally despite his promotion to command staff. Unusual involvement suggests non-standard parameters. Team composition: Wilson led Matthews, Riley, Johnson, Parker, with myself as Overwatch and precision fire support. January 18, 1993. Mission parameters modified 24 hours before insertion. Additional objective added: secure documentation from assets residents before extraction. Coleman must insist documentation contains evidence of weapons transfers that could compromise ongoing UN humanitarian mission. Timing extremely tight with new objective. Wilson objects but is overruled. Lucy continued reading, her heart rate accelerating as the journal documented the disastrous outcome. January 20th, 1993, operation catastrophically compromised. Ambush at both insertion point and asset location suggests prior knowledge of our movement plan. Wilson's team entered main compound while I maintained overwatch from adjacent structure. Observed multiple hostile forces converging with coordinated precision, inconsistent with local militia capabilities. Attempted to warn Wilson, but communications jammed. Precision fire eliminated 8 hostiles, but team overwhelmed by superior numbers. Observed Matthews, Riley, Johnson killed in initial assault. Wilson and Parker captured. Maintained position until nightfall, then attempted infiltration to determine status of survivors. Located Wilson and Parker in basement detention area. Parker deceased, evidence of interrogation. Wilson severely wounded but conscious. Extracted Wilson against considerable opposition. No sign of the intelligence asset, either never present or removed before our arrival. Critical observation: hostiles employed tactical communications and night vision equipment unavailable to Somali forces. Working theory: deliberate setup, possibly by elements within our own command structure. January 25, 1993. Wilson stabilized but requires advanced medical care unavailable through operational channels. Coleman refuses extraction claims. Mission failure invalidates support protocols. Made decision to use personal emergency exfiltration plan established after Eagle Falls. Contacted Mackenzie for private medical evacuation to Kenya. Coleman officially declares mission failed, all personnel KIA. We are now ghosts by our own government's declaration. The question remains, why send us into an ambush? What was in that documentation that was worth sacrificing an entire team? Lucy looked up from the journal, her hands trembling slightly. Coleman deliberately sent your team into an ambush. Why? What could possibly justify that? Wilson's expression was grim. That's what your grandfather spent the next 20 years trying to discover. After Somalia, Warren went officially dark, allowing Coleman to believe he had died in the operation, while actually establishing a network of former operators who had similar experiences with compromised missions. And what did he find? Fragments at first financial transfers to offshore accounts corresponding with failed operations, diplomatic cables discussing containment of operational liabilities. Then about 3 years before his death, Warren found something concrete. Wilson leaned forward, his voice dropping. Coleman wasn't just a handler who made bad calls or sacrificed operators for expediency. He was part of a small group within the intelligence community that has been selectively compromising operations to shape foreign policy outcomes without congressional oversight or presidential authorization. That's treason, Lucy whispered. That's power, Wilson corrected grimly. They would argue they're making necessary decisions that elected officials lack the courage or foresight to make, sacrificing a few operators or assets to maintain strategic relationships or prevent larger conflicts. Lucy continued through the journal, finding entries from the early 2000s documenting her grandfather's investigation. September 12, 2005. Correlation established between Coleman's career advancement and compromise operations. Pattern suggests systematic elimination of witnesses or evidence that could expose unauthorized activities. Network now identifies 14 operations between 1978-2001 with similar characteristics: inexplicable, intelligence failures, convenient elimination of key witnesses, subsequent policy shifts benefiting specific foreign or corporate interests. November 30, 2005. Contact from Wilson confirms Coleman now operating with tacit approval from elements within Director of National Intelligence Office. Official accountability mechanisms compromised. Conventional whistleblowing channels no longer viable. Alternative approach required. March 15, 2006. Documentation secured from former NSA analyst confirming communication intercepts between Coleman and foreign intelligence services prior to Somalia operation. Explicit discussion of team movement plans and timeline. Smoking gun, but requires corroborating evidence to withstand inevitable deniability tactics. The final entries became more personal, more urgent. January 10, 2018, medical diagnosis confirmed, terminal, 6 to 12 months remaining. Operational security now secondary to ensuring documentation reaches appropriate channels after my death. Lucy remains unaware of full scope of my activities post-retirement. Have prepared her with necessary skills, but kept her insulated from specific knowledge that would make her a target. February 28, 2018, contacted Wilson through emergency protocol, arranged final contingency planning. Lucy will inherit my personal effects, including this journal. Wilson will monitor Coleman's activities and make contact if circumstances require Lucy to become active. Regret necessity of involving her, but alternatives exhausted. May 15, 2018 final entry. Coleman's nomination for undersecretary position delayed, but likely to proceed within 5-7 years based on current political trends. Once he achieves cabinet-level authority, accountability becomes virtually impossible. This journal, combined with Wilson's testimony and the Redwood documentation, constitutes complete evidence package required for prosecution. To Lucy, if you're reading this, I'm sorry for the burden this places on you. The training wasn't just for your protection. It was preparation for this moment. Trust Wilson, trust your instincts. And remember that sometimes the only way to honor your country is to expose those who betray its principles while claiming to protect them. Lucy closed the journal, emotion threatening to overwhelm her composure. The grandfather she had idolized had been carrying this burden alone for decades, preparing her for a role she never knew she might have to fill. He knew, she said softly. He knew that someday I might have to finish what he started. Wilson nodded solemnly. Warren hoped it wouldn't come to that. He established multiple contingency plans, alternative channels for the evidence to emerge. But Coleman has been methodically eliminating those options over the years. When we received intelligence about his impending nomination for a cabinet position, I knew we had to act. So the attack on the naval base today, Coleman attempting to secure any documentation that might connect him to Eagle Falls or Somalia, Wilson confirmed. He likely had no idea you were there or that you possessed the journal. That was an unfortunate coincidence, or perhaps fate. Lucy considered this. But how did he know to look at Coronado in the first place? Wilson frowned. That's the question that troubles me most. Someone must have tipped him off about a connection between your grandfather's documentation and the naval base. But who knew you were there, or that you were Warren Graham's granddaughter? Before Lucy could respond, a soft beeping emanated from the computer terminal. Wilson had activated earlier. He moved swiftly to the system, checking the incoming communication. "It's Steele," he announced, relief evident in his voice. "He evaded Coleman's people and is requesting rendezvous coordinates." "Can we trust him?" Lucy asked, newly cautious after what she had learned. Wilson considered the question. "Your grandfather was an excellent judge of character. If he trusted you to recognize allies, then I'm inclined to trust your assessment of Steele. What's your instinct?" Lucy thought about the SEAL commander, his actions during the attack, his protection of her afterward, his willingness to challenge Coleman's narrative rather than accepting it at face value. "I think we can trust him," she decided, "at least enough to bring him in and assess his reaction to what we've discovered." Wilson nodded. "Then let's arrange the rendezvous, but with appropriate security protocols." As Wilson began encrypting the response to Steele, Lucy returned to the journal, examining some of the operational details more closely. One reference in particular caught her attention: repeated mentions of something called redwood documentation that her grandfather considered central to exposing Coleman's activities. "Wilson," she called, "what exactly is the redwood documentation? My grandfather mentions it repeatedly, but never specifies what it contains." Wilson finished his communication task before answering, his expression grave. Redwood was a code name for a Soviet defector during the late Cold War period, a high-level KGB officer who was providing intelligence on Soviet operations in the Middle East. The documentation he provided during the Eagle Falls operation included evidence of a separate channel of communication between certain American officials and the KGB operating the outside official diplomatic or intelligence protocols. "Coleman was working with the Soviets?" Lucy asked, shocked. "Not exactly working with them," Wilson clarified. "More like selectively trading information to shape outcomes in ways that serve particular interests. Sometimes American interests, sometimes private or corporate interests, occasionally foreign interests when it aligned with their long-term objectives." The documentation provided proof that operations were being compromised not due to intelligence failures, but by deliberate design. Lucy processed this revelation, the implications staggering. And in Somalia by 1993, the Soviet Union had collapsed, but the same methodology continued with different players. The Somalia operation was compromised to prevent exposure of unauthorized weapons transfers to certain clan leaders, transfers that Coleman and his associates had facilitated to maintain control over regional resource development. "Where is this redwood documentation now?" Wilson's expression tightened. "That's the final piece of the puzzle. Your grandfather separated the evidence for security purposes. The journal documents the pattern and provides his first-hand testimony. I can provide corroboration for the Somalia operation. But the original redwood documentation, the physical proof of the unauthorized communications channel, is in a secure location known only to your grandfather." "But he's gone," Lucy said, frustration evident in her voice. "Yes, but he would have left a way for you to find it," Wilson assured her. "Warren Graham never created a security protocol without a redundancy, and he never established a contingency without ensuring the right people could activate it when necessary." Lucy returned to the journal, leafing through it more carefully, now looking for any clue or hidden message her grandfather might have left. As she neared the final pages, she noticed something unusual: a series of numbers notated in the margins of several entries, seemingly random and unrelated to the text they accompanied. Wilson, look at these notations. They appear on multiple pages but don't correspond to the content of the entries. Wilson examined the numbers, his expression sharpening with recognition. "These aren't random, they're coordinates, latitude and longitude, but encoded using a system Warren and I developed during our time in Lebanon." Working quickly, Wilson decoded the notations, converting them to standard geographical coordinates. "These point to a location in the eastern Sierra Nevada mountains. Remote, difficult terrain." He looked up at Lucy. "A perfect place to secure documentation you don't want found accidentally. My grandfather took me camping in the Sierra Nevada multiple times when I was younger," Lucy recalled. "He always insisted on teaching me navigation techniques, wilderness, survival skills. I thought it was just part of his outdoor enthusiasm." "He was preparing you," Wilson finished, "ensuring you would have the skills necessary to retrieve the documentation if it ever became necessary." The computer terminal beeped again, indicating a new communication. Wilson checked it quickly. Steele has acknowledged the rendezvous instructions. He'll meet us at the fallback position in 3 hours. Lucy nodded, her mind racing as she processed everything she had learned and the implications for what lay ahead. So what's our next move? Wilson's expression was resolute. We secure the Redwood documentation. Without it, the journal and my testimony won't be enough to counter Coleman's influence and resources. He'll simply deny everything, classify our claims as the delusions of disgruntled former operators, and continue his ascent to power. And with the documentation, with complete evidence, we can approach certain congressional oversight committees, specific journalists with reputations for integrity, and a few remaining intelligence officials not compromised by Coleman's network. Wilson's eyes reflected decades of patient planning. Your grandfather established the groundwork for this contingency years ago. The channels exist. We just need the complete evidence package to activate them. Lucy closed the journal, a sense of clarity and purpose settling over her. The invisible woman who had spent years maintaining shooting ranges for Navy SEALs was stepping fully into the role her grandfather had prepared her for, not just as a skilled marksman, but as the carrier of truth that powerful forces had spent decades trying to bury. Coleman won't stop coming after us, she observed. No, Wilson agreed grimly. Once he realizes we have the journal and are pursuing the Redwood documentation, he'll deploy every resource at his disposal. The next 48 hours will determine whether your grandfather's final mission succeeds or fails. As if to emphasize his point, the bunker's perimeter alarm suddenly activated, a silent flashing light indicating movement on the property above. Company, Wilson said tersely, moving swiftly to the surveillance system. Multiple vehicles approaching from the main road. Lucy joined him at the monitor, watching as 3 black SUVs with government plates made their way up the access road toward the abandoned ranch house. Coleman works quickly, she observed, her voice steady despite the surge of adrenaline. How did they find us so fast? Wilson's expression darkened. The better question might be who led them here. As the vehicles deployed tactical teams in a standard search pattern and around the property, Lucy and Wilson exchanged a grim look. The confrontation with Coleman's forces and the truth about who might have betrayed their location would come sooner than either had anticipated. The chase for the Redwood documentation and the final proof of a decades-long conspiracy had officially begun. Secondary exit tunnel, Wilson announced, moving swiftly to what appeared to be a solid concrete wall. He pressed a concealed panel revealing a recessed handle. Your grandfather insisted every fallback position have at least 2 escape routes. Lucy was already gathering essential supplies, the journal, weapons, communications equipment, and basic survival gear, and stowing them in a tactical backpack. What about Steele? She asked. He's heading to the rendezvous point expecting to meet us. Wilson's expression hardened as he pulled the handle, revealing a narrow passage beyond the false wall. That's assuming Steele isn't the one who led them here. You think he betrayed us? Lucy couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. I think we can't rule out any possibilities. Wilson checked the surveillance feed one final time. Coleman's teams are conducting a standard search pattern of the main house. We have maybe 5 minutes before they locate the bunker entrance. Lucy hesitated, unwilling to abandon Steele if he was truly an ally. We need to warn him at least. If he's legitimate and walks into a trap. Wilson considered this, then nodded sharply. You're right. Your grandfather would say the same. He moved to the communications terminal and typed rapidly, sending an encrypted message to the emergency channel. If Steele is compromised, Coleman already knows our fallback protocols. If he's not, then we're giving him a fighting chance. With the message sent, they entered the escape tunnel, a narrow passage reinforced with steel and concrete, barely wide enough for a person to traverse. The air was stale but breathable, suggesting the ventilation system remained functional despite years of disuse. This leads to a drainage culvert approximately half a mile from the property, Wilson explained as they moved through the darkness, their way illuminated only by small emergency lights embedded in the floor. From there, we'll need to reach alternate transportation and head east. East, Lucy questioned. The Sierra Nevada coordinates eventually, Wilson confirmed. But first, we need to meet a contact of your grandfather's, someone who can provide additional context for the Redwood documentation and potentially help us identify how Coleman tracked us to the safe house. As they continued their escape, Lucy felt the weight of her grandfather's legacy pressing upon her shoulders. Warren Graham had spent decades preparing for this moment, training her, establishing fallback positions, documenting evidence, creating networks of trusted allies. Now it fell to her to complete his mission and expose the truth he had died protecting. In the distance behind them, they heard the muffled sounds of Coleman's forces breaching the bunker. Time was running out. The final confrontation was approaching, and Lucy Graham, the invisible woman, the ghost granddaughter, would soon discover if she was truly ready for the role her grandfather had prepared her to play.